Good afternoon. At this time, we'd like to call to order the Rail Committee meeting of the City Council of Palo Alto for Tuesday, November 19th, 2024. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Lithcott Hames.
Here.
Vice Mayor Lowing.
Here.
Chair Burt.
Here.
All present, 3-0.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Our first item is public comment for members of the public to speak on any item that's not on the agenda, but is within the purview of this committee. And do we have any members of the public who would like to speak?
Through the chair, at this moment, we have one speaker for general public comment.
Okay.
Our first speaker is Bob Ripser.
Hi, I'm I'm delighted to attend if by Zoom, and I hope that I live on Seal Avenue, and I think that other members, other residents of Palo Alto who live on Seal will be attending future meetings. We were all very surprised when the Churchill closure plan recommended by the advisory board was not the plan the council chose to go with, and we've never really received an explanation about why. And there was not a lot of consultation, at least among people who live along Seal, about the change in plan. And we are hoping that going forward, there'll be lots of opportunities for us to engage with the engineering study and to come up with best possible solutions, including some form of reconsideration of the Churchill closure option. Thank you very much.
The chair, that concludes general public comment.
Thank you. All right. So our next item is updates from our interagency activities. And we have Caltrain, VTA, and city staff, although we have an extensive action item related to Caltrain subsequently. So are there other updates that Navi, you would like to share?
Confirming there's no additional updates today.
Oh, there we go.
Confirming there's no additional updates today because we've got a pretty heavy agenda.
Ridership.
I'm happy to pull that up as well. But we have been seeing, I think you had actually, Chair Burt talked a little bit about this, but a 17% increase in our ridership since electrification. And so we are so excited for the outcomes of, what electrification is doing for the corridor. And as we kind of start and as a ritual for Caltrain, we'll come back next year in the early Q1 season to talk a little bit more about ridership in general and some upcoming promotions, both related to fares and passes for the 2025 year. So.
And that 17% was just the first month from September to October.
Correct.
All right, great. Good to hear it.
Is there a fear that that's kind of a novelty ridership? So it's
No.
I know you're into it, but more so than the average person. I just think it's a good question to ask. There's a lot of enthusiasm when something new comes along, and then it has to sort of settle into normal every day. Just wondering what you're predicting on that. Congratulations, by the way.
So I think we anticipated there would be some excitement naturally, and we would get ridership just from excitement and enthusiasm. Obviously, I'm not sure if you've read or been able to see our holiday train, and we're hoping that'll also keep the fire going into the holiday season. But I think what we're trying to do is recognizing that the landscape has changed for how folks are utilizing or riding the train. What are the opportunities that we can make this more of a regional rail rather than commuter rail? So we're trying to be as diverse with our ridership. So we have, trains, 2 trains per peak hour, trying to really diversify what ridership looks like. So we're grabbing students from Stanford and across the corridor and really making a solid attempt to look at riders outside of the 9 to 5. So I will say cautiously optimistic, but definitely as we kind of end this 2024 year.
And I'll just add to that. From a transit perspective, one of the key hurdles is getting somebody to try transit again. And once you get them to try transit, then they remember, I was sitting in my car yesterday cursing the cars that are cutting me off or whatever, sitting in traffic. So that's one of the key hurdles, is getting them to try it.
And I'll just add, anecdotally, I've heard from just numerous people who are using our new expanded schedule, either in evenings or weekends, to go to San Francisco for events in ways they never did before. So hopefully that pattern will stick and grow, and we'll see. All right. And then do we have any updates on VTA?
No VTA updates that I'm aware of.
Well, I'll give one. We had a
Yes.
a meeting here this morning on the Palo Alto Intermodal Center, and it was bringing together, led by VTA, but bringing together all the different agencies who have a strong interest in that station, which MTC is now using the term mobility hubs. And so this may be describing the future of Palo Alto Mobility Hub. But we had, it was led by, it's a VTA Board of Directors ad hoc committee, but partners of the City of Palo Alto, Stanford, Caltrain, Samtrans, AC Transit, and MTC, who all have significant interest in that station. So the focus is on three aspects: near-term activation of the station, medium-term, which is the Quarry Road extension and the bus access improvements, along with redesigns of circulation related to that, and then the long-term station area design, what might happen in the future and how it relates to the surrounding developments. So there's a lot of enthusiasm. It's initially funded by $1 million from VTA for initial design, with additional funds in the pipeline, I'll say. So we will have notice on the next meeting, but a lot of activities going on there. And then city staff.
Yeah, thank you. And I meant to say, we don't have anyone from VTA. Not that we don't have anything to say about VTA. Thank you. One quick housekeeping item. Just want to note that we do have a hard stop tonight at 5 p.m. And then staff updates. Want to note the Quiet Zone project, the Palo Alto Avenue crossing. We've completed the 100% plans, and the city submitted our GO 88 application to the CPUC for approval today. So once that's approved, and we don't know how long that they're going to take for approving that, but once that's approved, we can procure a contractor for construction. So that's exciting news. For Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston crossings, we did our diagnostic meeting last month on the 22nd, I believe. And we're currently preparing the concept plans and getting ready for additional outreach. Regarding safety improvements for the fence project that Caltrain is leading, that project's currently in the procurement process, and it's anticipated to start in early 2025. And the project involves replacing the existing 6-foot fence with a 9.5-foot fence with winglets. And the base bid involves 3,000 linear feet and an additional approximately 1,000 linear feet in fencing as an alternate. And Caltrain's funding all the improvements, and including the base bid and the alternate bid item. And we're also coordinating with Caltrain on maximizing the limits and funding of the proposed improvements along the corridor. And then the last little update that I have is regarding our South Palo Alto bicycle and pedestrian railroad crossings, our additional crossings project, which we've just recently kicked off. And we're calling it our South Palo Alto Bicycle and Pedestrian Railroad Crossings Alternatives Analysis. We need to come up with a shorter name for that. We'll have to work with our communications department on that. But that project aims to identify community-supported locations and designs for 2 new grade-separated bicycle and pedestrian crossings of the Caltrain corridor in South Palo Alto. And it will also recommend enhancements for connecting the crossings to nearby bicycle and pedestrian networks. And starting in September of 2024, the city's been working with Kittleson and Associates on this effort. And the initial tasks have included the data collection, reviewing the background documents, and developing a community engagement plan. And the work does closely align with our bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan update. So there is some shared data and coordinated outreach, and it's very convenient. We actually have the same consultant that is doing work for both of those. So we have a project timeline for that project right now, and it's got 3 phases that are scheduled right now. Phase 1, which includes the project introduction, data collection in existing conditions, and then the community visioning and evaluation framework. And that's going to run from approximately September 2024 to February 2025. And then phase 2, which will run from March 2025 to July 2025, would include potential crossings and ramifications, the benefits and trade-offs, and the evaluation of preliminary crossing locations and design concepts. And then phase 3, August 25 to January 26, which is community feedback on selected crossings and neighborhood connections, and then the final study adoption. And where this fits into the rail committee. So we're still finalizing the community outreach and engagement strategy, but we plan to present this plan and the work to the rail committee within each of the 3 phases that were discussed, and not including this, obviously this update and any other ongoing updates that we'll have. But the first real action item would come in January or February. And that concludes our staff's updates. If you have any questions.
Thank you. All right. So
Just had one quick question.
Yes.
Do we have is the fencing going to be for the entire right of way? And if not, do we have I thought we had asked for a map to see kind of what was being changed from the 6 feet to 9 feet and where we might be missing some, just to see if we have any funding gaps for closing other high risk areas that we might be able to address those.
Yeah, good afternoon, Ripon Bhatia. So there was a map that was prepared by Caltrain and was shared previously, and we can certainly share with you. But I think it covers on the west side between Churchill and the station, right, University Avenue Station.
Okay, so nothing is replacing the fencing on the east. It's all west side. We
Correct.
don't need to replace any on the east side.
Yeah, the existing fencing on the west side is already compliant. Thank you.
Yeah, and
On the east side,
I'm sorry. And I'll just note that on that west side, we have both 6-foot fencing and fencing that's less than that. So it'll be a nice improvement. Okay, we can now move on to action item number 1, which is to review the draft scope of work to be included in the cooperative agreement between the City of Palo Alto and the Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board and the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority for the connecting Palo Alto grade separation projects at Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston. And this would be an action item that would be a recommendation to the council for approval is the consideration. And who kicks it off?
Yeah, I'll kick it off as soon as the slideshow comes up. So we can probably just skip to the next slide, which is, I realize I didn't introduce myself as I was talking earlier. I'm Philip Cammey, the Chief Transportation Official. There's my name on the screen, along with the list of everybody else that's going to be involved in this. So Ripon Bhatia, who already introduced himself, and then all of our Caltrain staff, Rob Bernard, Mike Rabinowitz, Navi Dhaliwal, and Jill Gibson. Next slide, please. So we're here to discuss the scope of work for this, and ultimately to make a recommendation, hopefully to council for approval of the agreement. Next slide. kind of what I just said. So we'll be reviewing the draft scope of work that will be included in that, and then the recommendation. Next slide. Okay. Once again, just a reminder, we're really early in this process. It's still at the point where we're getting the agency commitment to proceed with the project, but we're starting to get to that point where we're entering that next box with preliminary engineering, where you see Caltrain's name attached to it. That's that next, I guess, third row, which is prepare the project report and environmental studies. So we're starting to enter that next phase. It's not where stuff gets really complicated and expensive, but it is that next area. Next slide. Okay, so the council direction right now, we have the Churchill Avenue alternatives, which is the partial underpass alternative to be advanced into preliminary engineering and environmental documentation phase, with the closure alternative as a backup. And for the Meadow Charleston alternatives, the motion to advance the hybrid, including the mixed wall and column approach, and the underpass alternatives into the preliminary engineering and environmental documentation phase. And also to get updates through the alternatives refinements. So at the 15% design, so that council might have the opportunities to change course and refocus on one option if desired. Next slide. So this is some of the key feedback that we received from both council and rail committee on these this next phase of this project. To look at reducing potential property impacts, to do more robust engagement, particularly with PAUSD, to review congestion impacts and to find opportunities to narrow the impacts of the construction, and to optimize the bicycle and pedestrian crossings. Next slide. This is the funding for the next phase. We've got the FRA. The FRA is the Federal Rail Administration. We've got $6 million in that funding, which is $2 million going to Churchill, $4 million to Meadow and Charleston. Really, that's $2 million per crossing. And we've got the rest of the money coming from VTA Measure B funds. That's $14 million. And you add that together, that's our $20 million budget. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Caltrain.
All right, thank you. Again, good afternoon, Chair Burt, committee members. Again, Rob Bernard, Caltrain's Chief of Rail Design and Construction. First, I just want to say Caltrain would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to participate in today's meeting. The team is excited to lean in to help advance this long-held community vision. This has been a long time coming, and I think we've assembled a really good team to help move this forward with the city, the VTA, and Caltrain. Over the last several months, the team has worked to collaboratively develop a technical and engagement approach to respond to the feedback we heard from the city council, and really to help move the project to the next phase of design. And so with me here today to present the team's homework is Jill Gibson. She'll be the Caltrain's project manager leading us through this next phase from the Caltrain side.
Good afternoon, Rail Committee. I'm Jill Gibson. Happy to be here today with city staff and the Caltrain team. So I'm going to walk through the slides, Ruben, if you don't mind advancing the next slide.
Next slide.
Oh, you're advancing the slides. Great. Okay, first we wanted to start off with the project development goals and objectives. We want to develop a common understanding through this process and this phase of the project in particular, really on the project development basis. What's the grounding for decision points and what are the implications? Importantly, we want to continue the strong collaboration amongst the city of Palo Alto and Caltrain. We want to drive cost-effective delivery and importantly, we're going to talk a lot about this, is driving durable decision makings. So developing enough technical material and sharing with the community, with the rail committee, with city council to be able to receive direction that is in alignment with the grant schedule and agreement. We want to improve price certainty through risk definition and management. We're going to talk about that. And then we want to focus on continuing to refine and ultimately narrow the scope that moves into preliminary engineering while still maintaining appropriate level of flexibility that's really needed in earlier phases of design. And then finally, and importantly, to fulfill that federal funding agreement scope and schedule that Philip spoke to. So our project approach and decision making. So as I mentioned, we want to continue the collaboration between city and Caltrain and really advance the alternatives and based on the feedback and the direction from city council to better understand and minimize, and we understand that the goal is to minimize property impacts relative to the project goals. What are we trying to achieve? And how can we achieve those goals while also minimizing property impacts? That will help us identify more refined trade-offs for decision-making. And so we understand at a high level, as y'all know very well, that the trade-offs include overall circulation and mobility for all users. And then deeply considering the constructability and getting in even deeper into the technical details around what does it mean to construct this project on a live electrified railroad, and including things like thinking about shoe fly and how do we build this to maintain operations. Importantly, managing risk and scope and schedule and cost, of course, is very important as we're launching the conceptual development and preliminary engineering phase of the project. We've developed an integrated city and Caltrain project team. We'll be working collaboratively and very closely on a monthly basis with the city staff for overall to achieve transparency and mutual accountability. One of our first activities will be to develop a project management plan. That's a requirement of the Federal Railroad Administration grant agreement. We will also be developing and regularly updating a risk register. And then importantly, we're going to talk about this. We're going to obtain commercial pricing at key project milestones to really inform the next steps. I have a slide on that in a moment, so we'll want to spend some time on that. We'll also be regularly updating the funding plan. So when we know the pricing and then what would be the funding plan, those go hand in hand. And then finally, we'll be incrementally, and we'll talk about this, we're going to incrementally advance the planning and design supported by really strategic outreach and engagement activities. So thinking about the iteration of technical work developed, engaging with the community, engaging with decision makers before we then advance into the next phase to be able to receive direction. So at a high level, I wanted to step through project development process, and then we have a more detailed schedule coming up. So at a very high level, we'll be kicking off the conceptual development and refinement, building off of the work that the city led and Caltrain partnered with on over the last year or more. And then we'll be, after we have those concepts, we'll be developing an independent cost estimate, a schedule, preliminary funding plan, and a constructability approach. With that information in hand, then we'll be working with Rail Committee, going to City Council and asking for a refinement of that locally preferred alternative for both Meadow and Charleston and a confirmation of the Churchill and Seal LPA. Then we would proceed into preliminary engineering and the environmental clearance phase. After that, then we would be updating that independent cost estimate, the schedule, the funding plan, and constructability approach to conclude the environmental and preliminary engineering phase. So at a high level, those are the steps. Next slide, please. So I wanted to spend a moment and talk a little bit more about the use of the independent cost estimate. So as y'all may know this, but Caltrain has an emerging understanding of the market. Caltrain is taking the approach to onboard industry professionals that have experience building projects like this on railroads. So it's to really onboard professionals to develop contractor style costs based on the commercial market conditions. So things like labor, material, how to build on electrified railroad to determine really the reasonableness and the validation of the project budget. This is an approach that's really important, we believe, to bring in early during the planning and PE phase. So we're going to do it twice, once during the 15% and once during the 35%. So we'll have a draft and then we'll validate it and have a revised ICE during the preliminary engineering. So overall, this is to validate the project budget based on the market costs. And then again, apply contractor style estimates. And then really assuring alignment with the project schedule. And that's really important to take that input from folks that have experience building these projects. And overall to reduce risk and identify any issues at these two milestones. I want to pivot a little bit to talk about engagement goals and objectives, and then we'll close it out with the schedule of how these two things fit together, both the technical work and the engagement. So overall, our goals and objectives are to really communicate the technical project elements to partners and to community members. This is a highly complex, highly technical project, and so we know how important it will be to make the project accessible so that folks understand the trade-offs and the decision points. We want to foster a shared understanding and really build that understanding of the project information. We want to provide timely and intentional updates to inform that durable decision-making I spoke to earlier. And then, of course, we want to coordinate our outreach efforts with City Council, rail committees, decision-making schedule. And then last, providing proactive, strategic, and targeted engagement in advance of the projects. So folks have timely information, they know how to weigh in, they know where to learn more information, et cetera. Next slide, please. So what we will be doing is that the team will be drafting a public outreach and engagement plan. And this is a framework that organizes and details targeted engagement activities to communicate that key information. And again, provide those opportunities for partners to weigh in and provide input and feedback. And so we haven't developed this yet. This will happen once the project really kicks off formally in the next phase. And it will include things like the details of meeting cadence, communication tools and methods. We've had initial conversations with the city about how best to utilize the city's communication channels that exist today and what do we need to do to supplement that. And it'll work through the details of public meetings, community meetings, pop-up events, et cetera. Importantly, and finally, it will also include an evaluation of how will we know if we're successfully engaging the community. So we'll set up a framework on how we evaluate and what the reporting requirements are for public participation. So during the conceptual phase, really our purpose is to inform and receive feedback from the community and community partners. During the refinement of the concepts these activities, as I mentioned, would be things like neighbor outreach. I think that was mentioned earlier in some comments, community workshops, open houses, certainly rail committee, and digital communications as well, such as a website, et cetera. And during the PE phase as well, continuing to inform and receive feedback after that LPA is confirmed. And as we're advancing that into the environmental phase and preliminary engineering phase, still keeping people up to date and providing opportunities for folks to provide feedback. So I wanted to walk through the schedule of both Meadow Charleston and then Churchill Seal. So this schedule on the screen assumes overall, which is in alignment with the FRA agreement, a 3-year project schedule, assuming a January 25 start. The technical work would begin in taking the concepts that were developed to date and refining them. We understand that Rail Committee and City Council would like us to check in. And so for Meadow and Charleston to check in on the progress of the concepts, and then for you all to weigh in whether to proceed with both through 15%, or if the direction is to really focus on one to advance into 15%. And then coming back, and so that's where you see the red box that says 1 or 2 concepts. So that's like a checkpoint. And then the second checkpoint is at the end of the calendar year of 2025 going into 2026. Really a pause to come to you all with the 1 or 2 concepts, and having Rail Committee and Council pick a concept that to advance into 35% in environmental. And then that would take us just to the end of 2027 to complete that 35% design environmental clearance phase. So then and this is a draft of how we intend to work with Rail Committee, City Council, the Caltrain Board, the community, neighbors, is really detailing out how do we align the outreach really strategically so folks understand where the decisions will be made, how they can weigh in, and have the full set of project information that's available. So the public outreach plan that I talked to earlier would really detail this out, and even in more detail. So for Churchill Seal, our overall milestone approach is to advance the concepts, and then check in at the end, check in throughout, but at the end, specifically at the end of Q4 2025, coming to the decision makers to refine the LPA selection and confirm how then we advance through PE and environmental. And so the next, if you click, you see that the outreach and engagement with the decision-making bodies are in alignment with that technical work. Next slide. So in wrapping up, the activities that the project team would start on after the cooperative agreement is really executed would be development of the project management plan, as well as the public outreach plan. And then additionally, Caltrain would be working to issue a work directive to onboard a general engineering consultant to start this work in collaboration with the city. And that, Rip and Philip, over to y'all.
Thank you. Sorry. So this is just coming back to the final recommendations to review the draft scope of work to be included in the cooperative agreement, and to recommend the approval of the scope of work included in the cooperative agreement, providing the $14 million in funding from the Measure B grade separation funding for the preliminary engineering and environmental documentation phase. And thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry. One more slide. Next steps. Next slide. There we go. Okay, November 20th, there's the TOPS committee. That's to execute the cooperative agreement at the TOPS committee. Then December, I think we're just hearing now, it's going to likely be December 9th. It's going to be this executive agreement. Also, there will be another item. I just want to note that we'll mention all of the other things that are happening at Churchill Avenue, all the other projects that are happening there. And then December 5th, the Caltrain board meeting. And then I guess TBD December 2024 at VTA. And with that, I believe that's the last slide. Thank you.
Thank you. So why don't we go to questions from the committee, and then we'll hear from members of the public, and then have additional discussion. Julie?
Thanks so much for the presentation. Really feels like a partnership. it really does feel that way. Couple questions. On the hybrid, knowing that hybrid and underpass have been advanced for our Charleston Meadow, I noted that the slide said in parentheses something like hybrid is a combo of columns and earthen wall. And I thought columns versus earthen wall were sort of like a option A, option B for the hybrid. Is that accurate? We're not talking about columns within an earthen wall. It's an either or.
So thank you, Councilmember, for the question. Just wanted to clarify that we will look at different options. So it could be combination like or could be individually totally columns. So we could look at those options and those can be worked upon as the council direction.
Great, thank you. I was surprised at the project cost estimate that Churchill Seal total was approximately 8 million for this next phase. And Charleston Meadow was about 12 million, given that Charleston Meadow are two completely different road train intersections, whereas Churchill Seal is a train and a road and a bike. I'm surprised that the cost of the Charleston Meadow wasn't a higher proportion of the Churchill Seal or vice versa. So I'm just maybe understanding it incorrectly. Just
Your
enlighten me.
question is totally valid, council member. Yes, the Seal Avenue crossing is not developed to any level yet, so it has very premature, layout only that we looked at. So it would require a lot of effort then comparatively. So that's one of the reason the costs are higher, and also there are efficiencies in Meadow and Charleston being similar plans. So yeah, so those are the two reasons why that.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Thank you. Jill, is it? I love, yeah, I love the euphemism durable decision making. It's certainly better to have durable decision making than decision making that falls apart. Here we are in a once in a generation infrastructure project dealing with the railway that runs through our city. But for y'all, this is your work and you deal with dozens of municipalities up and down the corridor. So I'm wondering if you could give us, if we're trying to learn from those who've gone before us with regard to durable decision-making or decision-making that fell apart, could you give us examples of where it worked well? And maybe those are easier to name. And then without naming the city where it didn't work well, give us examples of this type of behavior led to an indurability in the decision-making. Do you understand what I'm asking? Sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't, and you have a whole concept built around it. And we need to learn from that. And we want to learn from that. We're a city still grappling with these local preferred alternatives. Plenty of people disagree with each other on what it should be. And the project has to move forward. And so we're deeply interested in durable decision-making, which I take to mean decision-making that lasts and that holds up. So I throw that out as a request.
I appreciate that. And I think it kind of goes to overall our approach and the scope in terms of both the technical work that we're intending to do in terms of building off the concepts that were developed to date, but going in much more detail and thinking about all aspects of building this project, the constructability, for example. Meanwhile, working in parallel with the community and the decision makers and doing, our best as a team to communicate all of the factors that we can know that go into, ultimately what will be direction on how to move forward and not relitigating decisions that were made previously because time is money. Right. And so that's what we mean by that durable decision making is that, working as best as we can and robust as we can in terms of the outreach with the community, with the cities, all of the railroad requirements, all of the city requirements, putting it all out on the table with best that we know, including that commercial style pricing is really important so that the decision makers can make the decisions and so that the projects can continue to progress on schedule. I mean, at a basic level, that's what we're trying to achieve together.
If I could add to that, council member, you know, on large projects, if you read some of the white papers on the best management practices, that durable decision-making is a critical success factor. But because time is a key cost driver on large projects, every day of delay has an extraordinarily high cost for just the time-related overhead of the staff, plus the cost of escalation, especially in a volatile market. So driving those decision-making and getting them to stick and moving on so the project doesn't lose time is a critical success factor. So I just wanted to bring that and shine some light on that. That's important for project success.
Thank you for that. And it seems to me that a key learning has emerged around making the cost estimates more durable or more accurate. You're talking about onboarding industry professionals to develop these contractor style costs, and that's clearly new for you. You're talking about it as a new thing. Can you draw the contrast to in the past we did this and now we've put this in place and we have confidence that it's better and will lead to efficiencies for this reason?
So appreciate the question. One of the things that we've learned, you know, we've had projects where we have a group of consultants do the estimates, and they're really good designers, but they're not contractors. And when you're looking at time is a critical element in construction, and looking at production rates for construction in an electrified environment and having the contractor do that constructability analysis. How long is this going to take? What's the production rates? Where a designer say, I can do this in 2 years. The contractor might say, well, actually, this will take about 3 years with the production rate, because they bring that lens that a designer, that's not their day job. And so we've hired a firm that has essentially contractors that did this sort of estimate for a living for the last 30 years. And this was their day job of estimating construction projects, developing construction schedules, and using that pricing as kind of the owners to help inform owner decisions. And so that's some of the learning. It's just that the contractor brings a different lens, and also they have a little better window into the commercial pricing with the supply chain, labor availability, the volatility in the market, and what are the risks that a designer might not see that a contractor experiences, the risk of the insurance market, the bond market, those sorts of things that a designer might not have a window into. And so we've hired an additional firm to help us with that pricing.
Thank you so much. That's it for me.
Yeah, I've got 3 or 4. One, I'm very intrigued with your concept of a risk regulator. I'd like to use that in most council decisions. So if you could manufacture those and hand them over, could you kind of just go into that a little bit more?
Sure thing. So risk register is really the project team having an active document, essentially, that is anything that we could anticipate or that we know could be a risk to the project. I'll give you an example. So we are assuming that for the environmental clearance, that it would likely be a statutory exemption and a categorical exemption for CEQA and NEPA. This is just an example, right? And so that has a particular amount of time that it takes, and we've allocated a budget for that, right? There could be a circumstance maybe there's a higher level of a clearance required. We don't know that right now, but that is something that we need to be watching from a project management perspective, to be able to watch it, think about what will we do if a higher level of clearance is needed from a project management perspective. And so that we can be proactive and know how to pivot. So it's managing kind of all aspects of the project.
But what's materially different in that approach than other project management you've done?
Most projects of this size and scale have a risk register.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just identifying that
Okay.
that's a key activity that will be kicking off. That's a requirement of the FRA agreement.
All right. I thought you had like invented a new tool.
No, I
here
did
or
not
something
invent
like
it.
that. Right. And the frequency of your updates must be almost constantly, right?
Risk register is a live document that the team would review actively, like every kind of project team meeting, et cetera. Yes.
So would you have to have agreement to enter a new risk, or is it unilateral? Somebody could say this is a risk, you can't overrule it.
I mean, I think if someone's identifying a risk on the project team, we want to listen to them and we want to have the risk on the register and monitor and track it and see how we're, addressing it, mitigating it, anticipating it. So, I mean, I think anyone that's identifying a risk on the team, we want to listen to.
Okay. And then I had a note earlier, but you mentioned the word flexibility, which kind of underscores this. If we go through this and at some point with the flexibility coming back to council, we say, yeah, now that we see this 15% or whatever,
Yeah.
we're going to go with 2 crossings instead of 3. Relative to the document, do we have to make any changes? And relative to the project, what kind of changes would we have to make?
I can start with that and maybe others can add in. So technically, we do have a commitment with FRA stating that we do have a council direction to do a grade separation project
Right,
at
I know.
these 3 crossings.
Yeah.
And our commitment is to do preliminary engineering and environmental design. We have a commitment to complete up to 35%
35,
design
okay.
for that.
Okay.
Now, the city council have all the powers to cancel it right now and also for future. The only thing is the funding could be affected for if we were to make any decision that affects current phase. So following this phase, understanding the preliminary engineering and environmental scope and determinations, the council can even make the recommendations not to pursue further on the project.
Okay.
Yeah, just to add to that, I would note that typically.
Your light went off.
Mic went off, sorry. I just want to note that typically when you're awarded a grant like this, it's a very competitive process. When you don't deliver on the grant, it looks bad. And when you are applying for a future grant, which, we likely would be for construction or for something else, or maybe for some entirely different thing, they're going to look back and say, did you deliver last time?
Yeah.
And so we have this commitment. So that's the one thing I would just say, just to keep in mind, is that the city of Palo Alto wants to successfully deliver on its federal grants in order to look good. Whether or not ultimately Palo Alto decides it's going to construct these projects or go into final design or even move forward, that's really the decision that can be made in this phase. But I really do think that it's something that should be considered, is that we want to successfully deliver on this money that we've gotten from the federal government.
Right. No, that was my assumption. That's what I wanted to get confirmed. And it's not like we have another payment due in 6 months. So I wasn't asking the amendment issue around that. I was just asking if sort of legally, if we had to amend it, that we're going to drop one of our things, which gets me to my next question, which is then this money's spent for this. When we get to 35%, that's when we have to get new funding, right? Just so we have the time frame. And then just to underscore for the public, this is a question really for the public. And you already answered it, which is why I'm using the word underscore, that we're going to do the 15% and we're going to do the 35%. We're committed to doing that. At any time, we can look at that data, but never would we be making a decision in the city before the 15% came in, because we need that much data just to kind of look at the alternatives beyond the concept stage. So just any urgency to make changes or whatever are dependent on getting to this 15%, which is where the council has made it stand, that we have to have enough data to make a good decision there. So just wanted to have that in the public. Thank you.
Thanks. So just following up on some of my colleagues' questions and thoughts. First, on that proportion of cost of the Meadow in Charleston to the Churchill, Ripon, I think you kind of alluded to it, but we've described the Meadow Charleston as one mega project. So they're almost one. And I think that's kind of the answer. And when we look at something particularly like the hybrid, that's one hybrid that goes over the 2 areas. It's a little more discrete if we're looking at the underpasses. And then Jill had spoken about the value of the independent cost estimators. And I've come to really appreciate that as at VTA, we're going through the evaluation of the massive BART tunnel. And on a major segment, we just went through with 2 independent cost estimators, and they went, they are different approaches. One was one that has a massive detailed library of kind of, we'll call it similar or comparable projects. And so they were looking at it kind of from the top down. And the other, I think it was Bechtel, really looked at from the construction cost from the bottom up and what they would think it would cost to do it. And they came in remarkably close and remarkably different from our current contractor. But it was extremely valuable and informative. And so I'm really glad that that is part of our process now, or part of Caltrain's process, and thereby ours. And part of this context that Ed was kind of alluding to on next decisions and the costs, as we've seen at our recent meetings, we talked about the huge cost increase that have been going on in civil engineering projects and these kinds of grade separations. And then we had a striking one up in Burlingame they thought they were, after more than a decade, ready to break ground. And that one, my understanding was that there had been design changes, or really not a cost to update based on the latest design so much, but it went from 315 million to 600 million. And that created a bit of an earthquake up and down the corridor. And more recently, Ringstorff in Mountain View, which had a settled design and a cost estimate from just a few years ago, I don't know, it was 2 or 3 years ago, something like that. They got an update from, was it 330 to just over 400, 405, something like that?
It was like 60 to 80 million more than the previous estimate for construction.
So, and that was on a pretty lockdown design, and that just shows purely the construction cost escalation beyond what was anticipated, and all the agencies are experiencing this. So it's a reality that we have to face up to, that these projects are costing a lot more than anybody had expected. And so that kind of goes into where we will be in decision-making once we get to our 15%, which goes to one thing that I wanted to ask Jill to share. In our last 2 rail committee meetings around Churchill, we had talked about what Philip alluded to, which is a series of measures that are being done, have currently just completed on safety improvements. I don't know if people have seen that we actually now have improvements to reduce the risks of cars turning down the railroad when Google tells them to do that. On top of that, Caltrain has arrived at agreements with Google and what's the other ways to redirect their maps, and they're finally getting Apple to agree to discussions on that. So those combinations of things, advanced security, intrusion detection that Caltrain is moving forward with, and then signal optimization. Now that we have the electronics from the fiber optics related to the electrification, we can optimize our gate down times and hopefully in the future coordinate that with our own city signals and be able to get some modest amount, hopefully, of greater traffic flow from the same intersection. And then lastly, environmentally, and this is what we had been talking about in this committee, it was quiet zones. And looking at the environmental impacts of that noise, we've already greatly reduced the train noise from the electrification, but the horn noise is still there in either wayside horns or a quiet zone. And you put those together and they make a package of significant improvements that for some interim or indefinite period could be an alternative to a full construction of a grade separation. Combining that with the fact that we have all transit agencies are seeing lower ridership, and Caltrain this coming year will be updating their business plan to try to update it to what are future projections on the numbers of trains that we're projecting in 2040, 2050, 2060. We don't have those numbers yet, but we anticipate they're going to be fewer than the previous plan. And when we were looking at grade separation starting in 2017, we were looking at going from 5 to 6 trains an hour up to as many as 10 or more. And in that scenario, signal optimization would not have addressed the problem adequately. But it may very well be that we signal optimization combined with these other measures can address it for some indefinite period of time. So you combine reduced demand, less availability of funds because of the costs, and a package of measures, which, Jill, I think we received at Caltrain, what is being, I think, described enhanced crossing.
Yes. Treatments
strategy, something.
Yeah.
So can you just briefly share with us that how Caltrain has adopted that as an alternative for high priority grade separations, continue on the grade separation track, and cities can look at a package at far less cost. And the other aspect I didn't mention is this incredible construction disruption and all the environmental impacts of multi-year construction that would be avoided with the enhanced crossing strategy.
So just building off it, exactly nailed it what you said, is through the corridor crossing strategy, right? That's looking at all 71 crossings and how do we come up with a strategy and an approach. The last LPMG meeting we had was a good LPMG meeting where we really talked about, being realistic with the local policymakers group thinks that Caltrain hosts with the 17 jurisdictions. Director Burt is the chair. And so over the last 2 years or so, we've been working on this broader strategy. We have a delivery guide that Caltrain has published on the Caltrain websites. That is really the how-to guide, the delivery guide for delivering grade crossing projects. And so the last local policymakers group really talked about focusing this effort, the corridor crossings effort, to really focusing on delivering those high priority grade separation projects. We know how expensive these projects are. We know how limited the funding is federally and at state level, locally. And so really integrating the crossing enhancements as a part of the program, building off the great work that Mike Meter and others on the safety team, that I know that he's been here recently talking about the corridor-wide effort. And so we'll be pivoting to really focusing on a focus group of grade separation projects, and then what can we realize sooner for the benefit of crossings.
Thank you.
Of course, the community surrounding the crossings.
Excellent. Yeah.
I like to say that city also have initiatives like at Churchill Avenue. We have safety improvements, Section 130 project, where we have done the pre-signal work and signal coordination with the railroad preemption, enhanced preemption for that, and also Churchill Avenue enhanced bikeway project that will be connecting Stanford Trail with the PAUSD termination of existing bike paths. So there are other city improvements that are also enhancing that intersection and safety.
And those had initially all been separate projects, but when we look at them together, combined with some other possibilities, they create a package.
Can you clarify, Pat? I didn't get the list of things you were including in the package. Wayside horns, quiet zones.
Yeah, so I
signal
put them in
optimization.
3 buckets, basically. How do we address capacity? If we look at the reasons we were doing grade separations, need to address capacity, more trains, more cars. And then the needs to address safety and security, and then the environmental impacts, noise, and really project construction impacts. So as Rippon noted, on on capacity, we have our city Section 130 grant that we received from the state, right? And to improve those intersections. And then Caltrain has been performing upgrades within the gates, basically. And then we have on the horizon signal optimization. On the safety and security, that's in large part that same set of measures that Caltrain has already done. And if folks haven't been out at the safety standpoint side location, you can see a bunch of that. You got to be a lame brain to turn down the tracks now. And then security to really protect against intrusions. And Caltrain has recognized that not only do we have the longstanding issue in Palo Alto of intrusions from self-harm, we also have a need for greater prevention of intrusions to prevent vandalism on the electrified system. And then the last bucket is essentially noise and the impacts of construction. Altogether, they are a fraction of the cost of a grade separation and can be done much faster. And let's see. One other thing, Ed, you had touched on the process, and I just really wanted to commend Jill's company is Kimberly Horn, and throughout this process of the corridor crossing strategy, I've been really impressed with the deliberateness of investing in the process. There's the adage of why is it that we always have enough time to do it over, but never had enough time to do it right to begin with. And there's always that temptation to say, well, that would cost a few more months. Gee, we don't have that much time. But then if we reverse course and we don't have that, what's the term you used? Sticky?
Durable.
Durable. If it's not durable, we go back again. Yeah. So I really appreciate that deliberateness on the process is valuable. And then I just wanted to add one other thing, because we had a commenter under open comments that relates to the issues we're facing at Churchill and a part of this project. And the commenter had a notion that the council previous action had been closure at Churchill. And so whereas my understanding was we had the preferred alternative, the partial underpass, and the backup alternative was closure. And I'm seeing Philip confirming that. What we may have going forward, if we look at this enhanced crossing strategy, is something that we need to get before the council. A recommendation from this committee is that the secondary alternative, rather than closure, might be enhanced crossing strategy that would either be for some significant interim period or indefinitely. But we need to go forward with this 15% engineering to really then make that decision in a thoughtful way. But as we all have been talking about, that's looking very intriguing. Okay. Any members of the public who would like to speak on this?
Yes, through the chair, we have 6 people that would like to speak.
Great. And I hope all that prelude helps people know where we're coming from.
Our first speaker is Michelle G.
Good afternoon. I'm here representing dozens of families who live on Seal Avenue. And I would like to humbly ask you all to decouple what you do at Churchill with the proposed or a potential Seal Avenue tunnel. for example, the Seal Tunnel, you know, maybe you could save some money that you don't need it because there's a pedestrian bike tunnel just 3.5 blocks away on Cal Ave. It's also not clear if we build the Seal Tunnel, if kids will actually use it, or they're just going to use the Churchill crossing. I also wanted to mention thirdly, that the process I felt hasn't been fair. So earlier this year, the proposed tunnel was on Kellogg Avenue. When those homeowners got together and hired a lawyer to fight this, suddenly it was suggested it be moved to Seal in a meeting where not a single Seal Avenue home resident was in attendance. So it was a surprise to us. The proposed tunnel is going down the middle of the street of Seal Avenue. So think if you lived at my house, you would see the wall of a tunnel. We would lose necessary parking. A lot of Seal Avenue is multi-residence, and so there's parking as a premium. And also because of the tunnel, we wouldn't be able to drive into our driveway. Because the angle, we need a sharper angle to be able to drive into our home. So I'm asking how the city will compensate us homeowners for this. In addition, our property values have already dropped just because having the Seal Avenue Tunnel as a part of the official city plan. I've heard people talk about it's up to $1 million for some of the properties. So there's unforeseen impacts to this decision. So I ask you today to decouple the Churchill Avenue crossing from the Seal Avenue Tunnel. They're different projects, they're in different phases. And if it's too late to change it in the slides, I would ask that the rail committee going forward ask that they be decoupled in future work. And in addition, I'd like to say for the statement of work, instead of optimized Seal Tunnel, to put something like investigate Seal Tunnel in the official scope of work. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Elizabeth A.
Oh, it's been a long day for some of us here. I'm Elizabeth Alexis, and I'm the one who came up with the underpass, so you can shoot me if you want to. But anyway, so it is actually very exciting to see the project move to this phase. I'm excited about this approach where we actually dive a lot deeper on alternatives before we make decisions. I think that's also very helpful with costs and everything else, because often we commit to something without fully understanding the ramifications. I do want to make sure that as we're doing a handoff here, that it's not a handoff. It is still a cooperative process. There are many assumptions and requirements and even initial design elements, some of which I would say are set in stone, and many of which actually could be changed. And the most interesting things happen when you're looking at projects in constrained environments, when you start to question those. So I want to have cooperation, but not too much cooperation, where we have an ability to go back and forth on some of those as to whether they are truly requirements or truly or just nice to have. One suggestion is to have, especially for the South Palo Alto crossings, a kind of a red team, blue team approach. Often when we're having two alternatives coming forward, there really is one that people prefer. So the two are not, even if they are technically taken to the same level, they are not given the same treatment. And you don't have two teams who are trying to make each one the full package, which in this case, I did like that we were looking at extending the analysis beyond just the rail crossing in certain instances. I think for both up at Churchill and for the undercrossing in South Palo Alto, just looking at the changes in bike and ped and sometimes car networks to really understand that. right now, the piece of paper I've handed out to you, I'm again, over and over and over on this, is that we really need a better way to measure, especially bike level of service, where, especially because people will change how they're biking to and from as you create new infrastructure for them. But another issue is just on traffic analysis. This is a hot button issue. It's something where I think it's hard to actually get right. And also this idea that we don't just accommodate traffic, so we're not just building more infrastructure because of the traffic that we want to have there. But again, working with the city, are there ways that we can do traffic calming or think of ways to limit, especially with an elevated structure in South Palo Alto, you could see a lot of induced traffic. And that's something that I think we need to think about. Additional deliverable might be a recommendation or some notes about the South Palo Alto locations for each alternative for the 2 extra bike ped crossings. So I think with the different alternatives, you might want to do different things for that. And I think having some feedback back and forth. Again, the same thing with the bike and ped network, the update to our bike plan.
Thank you. That concludes your time. Our next speaker is Richard P.
Good afternoon. My name is Richard Perkey. I live on Tennyson Avenue in Old Palo Alto. And I wanted to address 2 issues related to the scope of work as it relates to the partial underpass at Churchill. The partial underpass closes Alma and eliminates the existing traffic signal from the neighborhood that permits you to make from the neighborhood a left-hand turn to go south on Alma. And there's been no provision for access out of the neighborhood if you not only take the lighted signal out at Churchill, but you won't be able to make a left-hand turn at Churchill. You won't be able to make a left-hand turn at Rinconada. You won't be able to make a left-hand turn at Kellogg. And with the Seal pedestrian underpass, probably won't be able to do it at Seal either. So you've limited access out of the neighborhood. In the full closure proposal for Churchill, there were mitigations at Oregon Expressway and Embarcadero that would provide an avenue out of the neighborhood to make a left-hand turn and go southbound on Alma. So as you consider the partial underpass and the scope of work, you really need to consider and add in and take account of the changes or some kind of mitigation to allow a signalized access out of the neighborhood to get southbound on Alma. The second thing is when we're looking at property impacts on the east side of Alma that might come about because of the partial underpass. The original proposal of partial underpass when it came around the time of the XCAP considerations had a single northbound lane, not 2 northbound lanes. And as it worked its way through various proposals and outlines, there are 2 northbound lanes at surface level and then the left-hand turn lane that goes and submerges. One way to possibly address the property impacts is to return to the original proposal, which had 1 northbound surface lane. And considering that when you get to the Alma's crossing of Embarcadero, Alma narrows to 1 lane anyway, that it could be possible to go with 1 northbound lane at surface level and perhaps then shrink the width of the impact of the partial underpass. That was my suggestion. Thanks.
Our next speaker is Laura G. virtually.
All right. Hello. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay, great. I just want to concur with what Richard P said previously about removing, I think I was emailed in those things previously about reducing the double lanes to a single lane and allowing left-hand turnout. That would make sense. The things that I wanted to raise, actually, the first was, since you've been mentioning the signal modifications, just wanted to let you all know, especially we have Caltrain here, the signal at Churchill is still mistriggers. I live near that crossing, and as far as I can tell, 100% of the northbound trains mistrigger the signal. And this is worse than it was before electrification because now it mistriggers maybe about 45 seconds before it's supposed to trigger. So this means that for an additional 5 minutes, an hour, like during rush hour, that's about 5 minutes for the 4 trains, mistriggering 10 minutes, then 5 minutes for the southbound train. So about 15 minutes an hour, the Churchill crossing is completely shut because of that mistriggering. With cars back up, of course, all the way to El Camino, all the way past Emerson during rush hour. It is a serious problem, so it would be great to inform the public on when you hope to address that signal mistriggering issue. It is significant. It's definitely a noise and environmental impact. So definitely a traffic impact. My sister wanted to get an Uber home and literally waited. I waited outside in my driveway with her for 11 minutes for an Uber driver who was the very first car in the left-hand turn lane to try to make a left-hand turn. So it is an issue. I think with that, I am disappointed to continue here the talk about wayside horns without full details about it. I very much appreciate the transportation staff's discussion of quiet zones overall, and I think that's a huge win and benefit for the community in so many ways, not only high school students, neighbors, residents, everybody. But as far as I understand from my reading of wayside horns, they trigger when a signal triggers. So when those signals mistrigger, the wayside horns will also trigger with that. And that would be a serious environmental impact for those of us living near the crossing, in addition to the high school and other people, just completely confusing. So I think that is one concern that I do have, but I do want to say I'm very strongly supportive of the quiet zones overall. And if we can get an update on the public record of when that signal will be fixed, that would be great. And that's about it from me.
Our next speaker is Melinda M.
Hello, everyone. I am here to advocate further for the quiet zones. So as those have heard from me before, I live between 2 level crossings. There are 416 blasts for each crossing, 832 blasts a day. This is not counting the freight trains. So this noise is detrimental to our health and to everyone along the corridor. 2016, City of Atherton put in their own quiet zone. So I'm asking Caltrain, what's happening at that crossing? Is that going to have some kind of underpass or hybrid or something like that? I'd like to know. I feel like we need to mitigate the problem now with the quiet zones. We need to stop the Alma freeway. So somebody mentioned traffic calming, and we need to encourage bike transportation. So the impact of COVID on the ridership of Caltrain has made the traffic go up. And now we're talking about spending millions and millions of dollars to have an underpass to accommodate a reduced ridership. I don't know if it's down like 40% of the ridership. I can't remember exactly the number. So someone mentioned the noise and the impact of construction. Caltrain has mentioned, I actually have to say, with all disrespect, that it's comical to talk about engagement and outreach, which did not happen in any adequate way for anyone talking to the neighbors from Caltrain about the electrification. So we're glad about the electric trains. There's less pollution, but the horns have been harassing us for decades, and Caltrain needs to be part of the solution for that. And I don't see how the city and the taxpayer of Palo Alto are going to pay for this huge undertaking of 3, or is it 4, changing to the crossing. That's billions of dollars maybe. So 23 seconds left. Thank you to the committee for listening to me. I will be back again with my smiling face to stop the horns blowing and to ask you to reconsider this whole hybrid eminent domain business. Thank you.
Our next speaker is John M.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for the meeting and the thoughtful consideration. I'm a neighbor of Caltrain and unhappy to be so. It's very noisy. There's been a big improvement with the electrification in terms of noise and pollution, but the noise is still intolerable. It's terrific that the rail committee is looking at other options like quiet zones. I'm all in favor of that as soon as possible, and I'm grateful for the consideration that the rail committee is giving it. It would be great to see if Caltrain would buy into this, because it would seem to me that it would be interested to have grade separation projects as a matter of building its infrastructure that a city would pay for to speed their delivery of commuters. But if there's millions and millions of dollars that are going to subsidize Caltrain with a low ridership, why would Palo Alto invest in the great expense of implementing grade separation projects at the cost of hundreds of millions with eminent domain? It's not fair to us. Palo Alto should not be building the infrastructure for Caltrain. We're disappointed and frustrated with Caltrain in the past. So I don't have much more to say, except thanks for the committee to bring up these issues. Thank you for, and respect to Caltrain for coming to listen to us. We're very grateful that you're here, and we hope to have a productive, happy negotiation.
Through the chair, that concludes our speakers for public comment for item number 1.
Great, thank you. And we had a number of speakers who understandably have not been attending all of our exciting meetings over the last 2 years. And there's been a great deal going on, and I certainly appreciate all the concerns that the members of the public have. I want to provide some information so that some misunderstandings about what has and hasn't been discussed are clarified. First, I did want to address this issue of the ghost train causing signal downtime. I appreciate that's not really that's control of Caltrain operations, but it's very definitely an issue on the corridor with the new signal system and electrification. Rob, I don't know if you have any kind of an update. I know that is in process. I thought perhaps it was solved at Churchill because recently I was this last few days there, and for the first time in quite a while, there wasn't a ghost train signaling. And I thought, oh, maybe it's solved, but I don't know from the member of the public who just spoke whether it's partly solved or not solved or what. But it very much is an issue and is being worked on right now by Caltrain. And either way, how can the public get the schedule on when we anticipate solving it?
So we'll get back to you on the schedule, but I know the team is working on that as we're working out the ramping up the new service and the new signal system and the signal optimization. That there are some software bugs that we're working through with the supplier on some of those issues, but we'll get back to you on the timeline unless my colleague has more information.
Yeah, so if I may add, I think the one thing that we learned is new trains, new challenges, quite frankly. And so as excited as we are about electrification, it's been a huge learning curve. And part of it is understanding that the trains still have to take, as Rob had mentioned, just an opportunity to really acclimate to the software. And so just as a reassurance, we understand that this has been a huge community concern of the gate downtimes and that being an issue in terms of congestion. So we do have a feature working with our team across the country and outside of the country. Stadler have now brought on a feature called the inhibit feature. That's actually just going to meant to, in layman's term, really help us the trains communicate with the gates so that there's less of this mistriggering. And we should be anticipating that will be a software that's expected for early December now. And that's really under the umbrella term. If folks are tuning into our board meetings, especially the TOPS committee, we are talking about this a lot more frequently as what is kind of deemed the terminology of positive train control. So how are we going out there and talking about operations and what this means for signal improvements, gate downtimes, traffic congestion? Whenever you hear positive train control, that is the messaging that we want to make sure the public and the community is understanding in terms of like, where can I get information about these more, real time impacts that are happening on the corridor, and to service that, whether you are in the car or pedestrian or riding the train, maybe feeling.
So can we get a follow-up with the kind of the timeline that our staff at Caltrain anticipates being able to resolve the ghost train issue and the horns related to it?
So I'm happy to attend the next rail committee meeting and provide an update during the Caltrain interagency update on just a timeline and a forecast of when we expect that will be resolved.
Great. Okay, thanks. And one of the speakers was concerned that if the ghost trains continued indefinitely, wayside horns would be added, but that's not the intention. So then that does dovetail into one of their other questions, which was about quiet zones. And we actually last year initiated a program to pursue quiet zones. We've had 2 meetings on that. It was just 2 or 3 months ago. It was a primary subject of this committee meeting was the update on the quiet zone plans. It was actually at that meeting that we received some information on both how long it takes to do quiet zones, how long it took Atherton, how long it would take here. It's surprising, but we were told it's in the neighborhood of 5 years, if I recall correctly. And we looked at data that wayside horns could be done faster and cheaper, whether it's supplemental to quiet zones or instead of, but and that about 80% of the horn noise could be mitigated through wayside horns. What's our next update on quiet zones? Philippa Rippon, do we have a plan to return to the committee with where the progress on that?
Yeah, Philip did provide a quick update earlier in the meeting. So we can bring back an item like in early next year regarding the concept plans when they're ready and share with the rail committee.
Great. And then one of the speakers also was asking on the for the partial underpass, this issue of a single northbound lane, which I know is actually one of the things that you are pursuing right now. That along with additional real estate prospectively on the southbound right turn lane onto Churchill, whereas right now we intrude into the Caltrain corridor. And one of the reasons that we had potential property impacts was Caltrain coming back and saying we couldn't do that same intrusion that we have right now. And that's one of the things that's being evaluated on what its impact would be and negotiated on with Caltrain. We don't know the outcomes of that, but those were the 2 main, and maybe there are other ways in which we're looking at minimizing or eliminating any property impacts. We were all taken back when we had that update that showed a whole bunch of prospective property impacts that were not what was previously anticipated and is not what the city has accepted. So that's why we're going with this next engineering phase, is to attempt to solve those problems, but we have to go those steps to solve them. Okay. Yeah. Nadia.
Yeah, and just one more thing, Richard, just there's a light that was also proposed previously for Northern California and Alma, and that is to help residents who live in Old Palo Alto be able to make a signalized left turn. So in case it might seem a little far from your project scope, but that was one of the places it's envisioned because there's a lot of intersections that come together there. And I think when you look at even the accident rate of people coming off the Cloverleaf, that solves a lot of issues. I just want to be sure that we don't lose that thread.
Yeah, and that impact that the speaker brought up has been something that has been discussed for several years. We don't have a decision on that solution, but it's very much recognized as a problem. If we lose the ability of people from Old Palo Alto to turn left and go southbound, they need another solution that's safe. And we do have from Churchill all the way to East Meadow, 0 signals on Alma, and that contributes to the speeding, frankly. The last thing that was brought up was how the focus on the bike and ped underpass went to Seal. I just want to clarify that we had over the last year and a half or 2 years, several meetings on the bike underpass. The first focus was on Kellogg, but Seal and Kellogg were always the two options that were being considered. I don't recollect anything about, we barely heard from neighbors on Kellogg. It was Palo Alto Unified School District and the problems that Kellogg would create and basically a complete moving of all the football field and the very constrained space there versus Seal being able to have the west side ramp come up in Seal Park or Pierce Park. And that was a primary reason why, those two reasons were why Seal has become the preferred location. It's yet to be kind of thought through if we ended up with the enhanced crossing strategy, whether a additional bike ped crossing would or wouldn't be aligned with that, or whether we'd continue to have the bikes and peds at Churchill. But it does need to be clarified if the partial underpass closes off bike and ped crossing at Churchill, if I recall, right? So it's not that the bikes could continue there. They would need a new location somehow. But all that's still what's being evaluated and not determined. I think that addresses a bunch of those public comments and concerns, and I very much appreciate that members of the public are not going to listen and follow every one of these meetings. So things that affect them suddenly, there may be an assumption that none of this has been considered or thought about or talked about, and that's understandable. But I just want to make sure that they understand that we actually have been talking about these things and they're real challenges. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just before you move on. I just want to add a couple of personal anecdotes. I live in the southwest side of the city. This is really more for our city staff. One of the reasons I was, as a resident, in favor of viaduct was simply because the construction time was so much shorter, 18 to 24 months instead of a projection of 6 years. Because when you live on the southwest side and you're trying to get to, City Hall, you really are counting on being able to get to Alma and then up. And so with regard to the construction impacts of whatever project or option alternative is ultimately chosen, I'm just putting in a continued request that we figure out how to quantify, if we can, the impacts of 2 years of construction versus 6, or 4 years versus 6. And if we go with something that is 6, what are we going to do very proactively to try to unclog those crosstown corridors that are trying to cross? For example, just with the increased frequency of trains, even though it isn't anywhere near the increase that was projected pre-pandemic, I normally have a 15-minute commute at peak time from my house to City Hall, and it's now 20 minutes, which, it's 5 extra minutes, but it's a 33% increase. I've been showing up late to City Council because my commute has changed, because the backup at East Meadow comes all the way past Wilkie and often to Goodwill, and it's just taking that much longer and then you know that you're going to hit 2 trains. So I'm trying to leave earlier now, not my strong suit, but it's a tiny example of impacts we're already seeing. And when I know we can be smart about getting in front of that for when the big changes of construction come. The second thing I want to say is I'm driving my mom now to a senior activity center in Menlo Park, which is giving me a different commute in the mornings up Alma, across Palo Alto Avenue into Menlo Park. And I'm seeing mistriggering on the Palo Alto Avenue as well. So to the extent that was raised for Churchill, I think it is also happening, at least in the mornings, at Palo Alto Avenue. Thank you.
Yeah, that mistriggering's been really corridor-wide issues. And I just, before going to Ed, I wanted to, on this construction impact, share one example. When the XCAP committee looked at those alternatives, one of the things that they brought to the attention of the consultants was a technique called jackbox construction, which is basically a prefab grade crossing structure. It's not the whole thing prefab, but it drastically reduces the construction time and impact. Our consultants at that time, AECOM, said, well, that's not an approved process. We don't know if it really work and things. The corridor crossing strategy that Jill leads on actually has that as one of the innovative best practices. It's not applicable everywhere. And so that'll be part of the process, but it's very much now on the table, and that'll be part of what they look at going forward. Ed?
I was just going to say that the chair's comments to a number of the speakers here is correct in terms of the content and also in terms of, we don't expect you to be here for every meeting. But in that, we love it if you were, yeah. But in that regard, that's why we need to approve this. So I would like to move the acceptance of this contract.
Second it. Any other discussion? All right. Call the roll.
Vice Mayor Lowing,
Yes.
Councilmember Lit Hames,
Yes.
Chair Burt.
Yes.
Motion carries 3-0.
Thank you. So will that is scheduled to go to the council on what date? And
So we'll see. It likely will be the 9th. It could be December 2nd, but I think at this point it will likely be December 9th.
Okay, and it would be, if it's a 9th, it would be coupled with the report of the ad hoc.
Yeah, I want to say coupled, but I think the way that it would work, because I don't think that would be the other one would be an action item because they're all things under progress, but they'll be on the same agenda. So this would be by the rules, this would be a consent item because it passed unanimously, and that item would be an informational item.
And we'll get to the real committee summary report as the next item, but potentially it would allow discussion at the council of the enhanced crossing strategy, that package of measures as an alternative that the council would at least get introduced, that the part of the report out that we've been discussing it and figure out how we turn that into any potential council action.
Well, yes, the report from the committees is actually scheduled on the 16th of December. So we've got a slight disconnect on the timing of the items coming forward. So we can discuss whether the consent item should go on perhaps on the 16th at the same time, just so that they're as concurrent.
Great. Okay, that concludes this item, and we get to the Rail Committee 2024 Annual Summary Report, which in our packet is item 2.
Pat, given that we're kind of running up on the time clock, should we go to the next one first, which is bigger, and we could push this if needed?
Yeah, and I think this will be pretty perfunctory, but I'd be fine. We can.
Yeah, actually, I just want to note, no actions required on this one. This one is just, just summarizing the activities of the year, unless you have anything that you want to add to that. This one can, it's just really for information.
Be an FYI.
Yeah, and we can review this and provide staff if there's any supplemental things that we discuss that we think are important to be reported out. You could provide them written.
Yeah, that'd be fine. And also, as noted, this actually will be discussed at the full council on the 16th. So you'll have the opportunity to expand on the narrative.
Great. Okay. And then we're moving on to item 3, which is an action item. Well, it's listed as an action item, but it's really for us to receive an update on the Caltrain, our bicycle and pedestrian master plan, draft plan as it relates to Caltrain stations. And I see that it's listed as stations. I'd actually hoped that it would encompass kind of all ways in which the master plan intersects with rail, grade crossings and prospective pedestrian crossings. But if we have it more limited today and need to have a follow-up that addresses those other areas, perhaps we could do that.
All right, and I'm just going to turn this item over to Ozzy Arce and our consultants from Kittleson.
Awesome. Thanks, Philip. Appreciate everyone hanging in there with us. We will be brief this afternoon. My name is Ozzy Arce, Senior Transportation Planner, also project managing the Bike and Ped Plan update, which locally is referred to as the BPTP update. This afternoon, we'll report on the findings from a community bike ride and walking tour we did in the springtime as part of the existing conditions analysis phase for the Bike and Ped Plan update. Tonight, we want to hear your feedback on the key themes and findings, but we really will move into the third phase early next year, which is really presenting the priorities, the recommended projects, and then also an update to the vision, the performance measures, and the objectives of the plan. So today is just reporting now on the findings, no action. With me tonight, we have Amanda from Kittleson, who is project managing from the consultant side, the Bike and Ped Plan update, as well as Hannah Greenberg from Caltrain to provide an overview on the Caltrain's new station access policy and help us make the link between that new policy and the Bike and Ped Plan update effort. So with that, Amanda, take it away. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Ozzy. Can I get the next slide? Okay, so today, as Ozzy mentioned, I'll be sharing findings from the walking tour and the community bike tour, and we are asking for your feedback on these findings, any input you have on the observations and themes that I share today. Next slide. Next slide. And I'll start. Okay, so Ozzy also just shared we're in phase 3 now. So we'll be coming back with our recommendations for the bike network as well as pedestrian district guidelines, which will be those projects that will improve access to the stations and crossings of the rail as well as other major barriers around the city. Next slide. In April of 2024, we went on a walking tour in partnership with Avenidas. We followed a route that took us down to the Palo Alto Caltrain station and then back up around downtown. And folks joining were asked to just share their thoughts, how they were feeling walking through that pedestrian environment, and what ideas they might have to enhance the experience. And our team compiled these thoughts, this input, and used it to shape our pedestrian district guidelines, come up with some projects within these pedestrian district areas that would improve the walking conditions there. Next slide. Overall, what we heard was a need for maintenance at the station. There were broken sidewalks and sidewalk upheavals that made it difficult for people to walk, particularly people with strollers or carrying things. There was also a need for increased wayfinding to help people figure out how to get through the station to the other side, make the connections that they need. There's a desire to explore continuous sidewalks at the Alma interchange and along University Avenue, and an interest in extending the Main Street feel beyond University Avenue to the surrounding parallel streets. And people also talked about more car-free streets and enhancing alleyways and entrances. Next slide. So here are some examples of what we saw during that tour. And then I think what will interest this group is images from the Caltrain station. So just you can get a sense of that experience walking through that corridor. Pretty narrow and can't really support the volumes of people that are interested in crossing, particularly at peak times. Next slide. Here are some images from the Alma interchange, the uncomfortable tunnel, a need for more wayfinding, and a general desire for more space for people walking. Along University Avenue, people talked about how to activate the space, make it a place people wanted to visit and stay, as well as a place that was easy to walk along. Next slide. And on Ramona Street, so you can see an image of the car-free street and then an alleyway opportunity, basically, for increased connection and permeability of the network downtown. Next slide. The next day, we went on a bike ride. It hosted in partnership with Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. It was quite well attended, and we went along the route you can see on the screen, traveling from I think it's Cal Ave station south, and then crossing to Mitchell Park and up along the north there and back down. So next slide. What we heard along the bike ride was a general interest in upgrades to the existing infrastructure. So that might look like more physical separation on existing bike lanes, wider bike lanes, better paved streets, and enhanced transitions from arterial roads to residential streets, as well as connector bike paths, which were acknowledged as something that Palo Alto has and does really well, and they are an integral part of the network, but it can be tricky to find them. So again, more wayfinding and clarity on the bicycle boulevards. Next slide. Here are some pictures from stops along the route. Cal Ave, Ballpark, a need for more maintenance, again, desire for physical separation, and appreciation for the bike path connectors that do exist. And then discussion of the East Meadow Drive pilot project. Next slide. A few more stops here up on, I guess the further northeast side, not close to the railroad tracks exactly, but we can see discussion around the types of traffic control that are used along these routes. And then also the discussions about the volume of kids going to school and then the kind of change over time of a day in the usage of different lanes, but still a desire for full-time bike lanes versus something that might be used part-time. And then we ended at California Street. And next slide. We also received a number of comments throughout our engagement phases. And so we compiled a number of comments from our interactive map and from other events we held and summarized them here. So people talked about lighting and murals, making station areas more welcoming, discussed how low visibility and the lack of designated paths was a challenge, particularly at university. And then how people's behaviors can also be challenging. So riders choosing not to dismount and mixing with pedestrian traffic, creating some hazards. And there was also some discussion of grade separated crossings, support for the Seal Avenue undercrossing to Piers Park, and then noting the lack of opportunities for crossing south of Oregon Expressway. Next slide. And I'll turn it over to Hannah to talk about the Caltrans station access policy.
Great. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for having me today. So I wanted to chime in quickly to share a little update on our station access policy that was adopted at the beginning of September. The policy outlines Caltrain's goals for improving how people get to and from our stations corridor wide. And so this slide shows a overview of the contents of our newly adopted station access policy. And if you want to see more, the policy can be found on our website by clicking on the projects tab from the homepage. Next slide, please. So there's 6 goals in the policy that cover safety, customer experience, ridership, equity, sustainability, and partnerships. And that partnerships piece is what we're really talking about today with cities like you to help us advance the station access policy goals. Next slide. So the policy also included an appendix that is, we're calling our station access toolkit. That lists example actions that can help inform decision-making when identifying possible access improvements. And those actions are organized into 5 categories: customer experience, active transportation, transit and shuttles, private vehicles and parking, and partnerships. And I know that the bike and ped plan has already taken note of the example actions in the active transportation section of that. And so we're happy that it's already being put to use. Next slide. So we really need cities to help reach the goals outlined in the station access policy. And so we're reaching out to collaborate on planning or development projects in the Caltrain station area. And this is a great first example of this in action. And Caltrain is committed to working with local jurisdictions to ensure safe and direct connections to, from, and through Caltrain stations. Collaboration is really essential to meet the objectives outlined in the policy, like I said. And we're seeking partnerships on the station access policy, and the city partnerships toolkit, as well as the Go Pass incentives to make Caltrain overall more attractive and available transportation choice for residents and workers of all incomes. And through these partnerships with cities, we can create a future where cities thrive, residents and workers enjoy a higher quality of life, and Caltrain can thrive. And we all benefit from reduced greenhouse gas emissions and enhanced sustainability. And that ability of Caltrain to sustain and expand service in the future will depend in large part on cities actively supporting the expansion of ridership to get to groups beyond the traditional Caltrain riders that we have today. And this can be really achieved through collaboration. So we encourage all cities to reach out to us and really appreciate that Palo Alto is already doing that and using the station access toolkit to help develop the bike and ped plan. So thank you so much for having me.
Colleagues, questions before we go to the public?
Do you want to go before me this time, Ed?
I just had one overall question, which is what you found out, is that what you expected to find out, or did you find differences that are notable?
I think it was about what we expected to find out and hear people sharing the need for wayfinding, low visibility, narrow, uncomfortable facilities that exist. I think what may have been more surprising to me was, well, there was just a focus on University Avenue and just a lot of interest in making that a very welcoming space. And then there was talk about how to do that with possibly a parallel bikeway. So really just prioritizing pedestrians on University, emphasizing there. Yeah, Ozzy, what would you add?
I think that piece about University Ave stood out to me. I think it's a mixed bag. People's opinions on whether bikes should or shouldn't be on University, or whether Hamilton and Lytton should be the more desirable option. For us in the bike and ped plan update effort, we're kind of leaning on the University Ave streetscape project to make that determination, and moving forward with council's direction to prioritize Hamilton and Lytton as our downtown corridors.
And then the other question was, when you talked about them having, this is like a live focus group walking around. So I understand it's qualitative, not quantitative. But when they talked about what they call it, a dark tunnel, and they wanted some infrastructure improvements, that's not cheap. So was it more of, we'd like it to be a brighter tunnel as opposed to we'd like the tunnel gone? Or could you get to that level of cutting it up?
Yeah, big dreams, a 20-foot wide tunnel that's
Exactly.
straight through. I think there was an appreciation for the cost and like feasibility of some of these improvements. I think lighting is very high on the list, and yes, it can be expensive, but I also think it's essential for people's feelings of safety and security. And I think it would get more use there and at Cal Ave if lighting were improved. Yeah.
Okay, great. No, that's very good insight.
Yeah, thank you. Just to pick up on Ed's comment about the live focus group with its inherent qualitative nature, I was struck by your choice of Avenidas as the sole partner. Of course, it is vital to understand the experience of seniors and walking around the downtown. And there are other populations that come to mind, like parents with small children trying to navigate the city by foot. Or maybe those retail shoppers we're trying to attract desperately. So I'm just wondering the choice there of, do you agree that it's important to get additional perspectives? And if so, how are we going to do that?
Yes, absolutely. And we have been talking to parents, both at city school commission meetings and in separate focus groups as well. We hosted the walking tour in partnership with Avenidas because they were also interested and available to commit that time and those time and resources. But we are interested in getting multiple perspectives. Yes.
Okay, great. And on the community bike ride, I might have missed it when you gave the presentation, but I did notice in the slide, you said there's an East Meadow Drive pilot that is highly anticipated. Apologize if I missed a verbal elucidation of that. If you didn't give it, can you tell us more?
Yeah, I think what that was referencing was the South Palo Alto Bikeways demonstration project that we were awarded a federal Safe Streets for All demonstration grant for. That's for pilot striping project on East Meadow Drive and Fabian.
East Meadow and Fabian, the other end. Okay, near the JCC. Correct. Okay. No, not the JCC. That's Charleston.
It is.
Okay.
It is. Yes, it's going all. It's going and then going up all the way on East Meadow.
Okay. Well, I was hoping that the East Meadow pilot had something to do with El Camino Way, because had the tour not happened from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m., but instead had been more like 8:30 to 9 a.m. or depending on the day, 2:30, 3 o'clock. It is a river of bicycles. Particularly going on El Camino Way across Maybell across El Camino to El Camino Way heading eastbound. It's just one lane. There's no green. The bikes and cars share it, and there's parallel parking on the side. And it is astonishing to me that people are not getting injured there. The kids are doing their kid bike behavior, kind of owning the street. Good for them. It takes a watchful driver to keep that channel safe. And so I'm hoping that as we put the bike ped plan together, that we will, continue to look at what we've done with El Camino Way and figure out how to ensure that if that's the artery it needs to be, that the safety enhancements are put in place.
Thank you.
I hear you there, council member, and know that the Maybell El Camino Rail to El Camino Way area is definitely on our radar. We have received feedback on exactly the concerns you shared. I believe it is a designated school route. However, just note that we would love to go on community bike rides all over the city at different times. And obviously we didn't hit all the hot spots here. Just know that that is definitely on our radar.
Perfect. Thank you. That's it.
So first, following up on that El Camino Way and related issues, when you did your community bike ride, did that include safe routes to school leaders?
I don't know if there were parents with the. I don't know if representatives from the city school team were on there, like parent communities. There might have been parents that were there, but I don't think they came from the city school, like they weren't wearing their city school cap on, if you will.
Well, I'll just say that their knowledge and perspective is extremely important, and it's been central to our bicycle master plans for now 20 years is focusing on safe routes to school. So I would have expected that they were a very important stakeholder group in these community rides and all the other inputs that we're having. Which leads me to the question, it's great you did this community ride. Are there others planned? For instance, there wasn't one, and what I thought today was going to focus on was on access to our university station. And I haven't heard anything about what's been evaluated there and what gaps or issues have been identified so far on bike and ped access to and through the university station, for that matter, because it's not only getting there, it's passing through it.
I'll say, just going back, everyone was invited to the community bike ride, and just know that for parents, we know that they are an important part in our planning effort. And what we've done for the bike and ped plan update is done specific focus groups, specific where we invite parents to come to those focus groups. They've been very successful. We take the formality of a city school meeting out of it and really get into a roundtable discussion with the parents. We've done it in the past and we hope to do it in the future.
When you say parents, there's the parent community in general, and then there's the Safe Routes to School leadership.
Correct. Like city staff leadership, or you're talking about parent leadership?
Through the PTA council, Safe Routes to School committee.
Okay, and we can connect with folks through there. What we've done again is through our Safe Routes to School program, connected with parents and invited them over and had these focus groups meeting, but we can definitely look to invite additional folks and leadership from the Safe Routes to School.
Well, when you
team.
say through the Safe Routes to School program you did, I'm not quite following it.
The staff that we have in the Office of Transportation have linked us with parents who they work with at different schools.
Well, then that may have been
and they may be the
same
same people.
Okay.
So, but yeah, just know that parents are a big focus of this effort. And so that will continue going forward. And again, everyone was invited to the community meetings. Separate from that, to answer your question around some of the findings and recommendations, we hinted at a few, keeping in mind that the downtown walking tour wasn't just about station access. It was in general just about all of downtown, although there were a few findings that we can re-highlight, if you will, if you would like us to, that speak to the station access piece. But I think moving forward, part of our recommendations will include some of the station access pieces, not all, but there might be a
Well,
few.
that was that seemed like a valuable walking tour, but as you said, it was a walking tour looking at downtown pedestrian issues, not primarily, but it connected to the station, but not primarily. But that's different from biking, and with a focus on station access via biking. And I had thought that, in fact, when we had both the initial presentation of this committee and then the follow-up that I had a briefing with you folks, that was a prime area of consideration, is how do we solve the bike access issues. And I'll say that if you are, I'm trying to remember the platform, it's the far platform, the southbound, right? Okay. So if you are going northbound on Caltrain and riding your bike to the station, there is no good approach. The Homer Tunnel goes across to the west side and has a good access southbound. So you take that from Homer, and we have a good bike lane on Homer there. But if you want to go northbound, you're left to a decision. Do I try to cross at Forest? Do I try to cross at Hamilton? Do I do it without signal at Forest? Do I do it with all of the car traffic at Hamilton? And then you arrive in a parking lot. So that's a major Caltrain access issue by bike. And I haven't seen anything talking about recognizing that problem and then therefore what are the solutions. Similarly, and this is something that we actually talked about earlier today with the VTA ad hoc on the University Station, is the circulation through the station and to the platforms. And there are very much problems right now of the bike lanes not really connecting through the station, as well as the bike lane on Alma that peters out at Lytton and what might be the long-term fixes there. So those are important issues related to this topic that I thought we were going to focus on today. I will note on the wayfinding, we did get an update from VTA today that MTC is in the process of a uniform and extensive wayfinding and signage system for the whole Bay Area of all the different transit systems. And University Station has been picked as the station in Santa Clara County that will be kind of the trial for all this new signage. And so they have, it really looks great what they're doing. And then it'll get rolled out at all the bus stops, and all transit is going to have common signage, but they want to pilot it and get feedback. So within the station area, one, I'd encourage you to connect with Jay Tyree at VTA and get an update on what's there, because I think within the station area, we're going to see a great deal of improvement there as a result of their own efforts, and we can just piggyback on that. Within the bike plan, to what extent is bike parking part of the issue, and to what extent is the security related to bike parking an issue?
It's something that always comes up. We did a bike parking inventory as part of our existing conditions analysis, and I assume that moving forward, there will be a recommendation for additional bike parking at key locations, primarily downtown or other commercial areas. So yes, it's in part of something that we're considering. We already looked at where there are gaps in our downtown, and I assume there will be recommendations of us.
So that's on the adequacy, and then the security part. If we improve the ability to take a bike to the train station, but it gets stolen, we aren't really solving that problem. And we have a significant bike security problem at University.
Right.
It's notorious. And so at a minimum, I think we need to recognize the problem so that we then put it on the list of things that need to be solved. Now, the solution may be more in the arms of Caltrain and VTA, but it's still a big part of our whole bike network that you just can't roll the dice that your bike is going to get stolen. And it's a big problem. It's not a small problem.
I hear that. Just maybe zooming out a bit, we are cognizant of these issues, and the city has purview over many of these elements. You mentioned station access in terms of bike lanes, getting to it. But I think part of what we want the public to know is that a lot of this also happens in coordination with other agencies like Caltrain. You mentioned wayfinding, you mentioned lighting at the station. Those are things that we can work in partnership with, yet it is up to some of our other agencies to really take charge of some of
But
these
they'd still be
elements.
identified as problems within our plan, and then it would reference partners to solve it, I assume.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so I want to note the things that you brought up, like the Lytton and, the University Circle, examples like that. Those are things we're cognizant of. The staff is cognizant of. What they're trying to bring today is the things that were identified in the outreach. That's what they're bringing today. And so they are cognizant of that stuff. They wanted to find what Rail Committee's input is, what things Rail Committee wanted to share in order to build into their recommendations. All that other stuff, they don't need to take a bike out there to know where there's inadequacies at this point.
What I understood we were having a report out on today was the current status of the draft of the bike and pedestrian plan as it related to our stations and their access and our grade crossings. And so that report, in my mind, would have included all the things you're conscious of and intend to include in the plan, as opposed to these nice, walking tours and the single ride tour. But that's not the comprehensive aspects that I was hoping and expecting were going to be presented. Is we want to know, where are you on the draft of this plan as it relates to getting to and from stations?
So if you'll, just refer to the schedule of the pedestrian and bicycle transportation plan, this is where we're at. We're not at the point where we've developed recommendations. We're at the point where we're taking all of the information that we gathered, such as the walking tour, and we wanted to get your feedback. And what we heard specifically from the Rail Committee last time is, don't bring us your fully formed recommendation. Come to us so we can still provide you your input. Yeah, and so we're a little bit torn here. Are we supposed to come to you with?
Let me clarify. That would include what you're aware of. That's what we want to know, what you're intending to fold into the plan, not what necessary. You may not be at the point at here are our tentative solutions. You may or may not be at that point in the plan, but here are the issues that we've identified that are problems. That's what would be part of this phase. Where else are we going to have that opportunity to hear, where are you? I can't know what you know so far and what you've identified so far unless you share it.
I'm going to augment that, if I may, just to try to offer a different but related perspective. This is the Rail Committee, so we were expecting that there would be a presentation on the intersection of the bike ped master plan that's coming with rail. By definition, that's why it's coming to rail, and I think we didn't see that in the presentation. Another example is our Stanford Ad Hoc Committee spent a significant amount of time with our colleagues at Stanford trying to develop a Quarry Road bond measure, which thankfully passed. And inherent in those conversations was how bikes were going to be coming from the northern part of Quarry Road, Menlo Park, across Quarry Road into the bus train situation. And we forecasted then how important it was going to be to know what the bike ped plan was thinking about these bike routes. Our resident bike enthusiast and expert informed me that it's really hard when you're on a bike at that particular place to sort of know where to go. It's a mishmash, and we're all excited about that getting resolved. So I think for me at least, the expectation and hope was, when you came to us with your thoughts about the intersection of bike ped and train stations, that we would then have the opportunity to say, oh, and what about this and what about that, to give you feedback, because your recommendations weren't fully baked yet. We wanted to be a part of the development of that, and it just feels like maybe we've had a misalignment on what the content we hope to see today was going to be.
If I could weigh in, I think it actually is a misalignment in timing. That quite frankly, staff is not at that point to be able to report out at that stage in the completion of this work. At the same time, there was a great deal of urgency in having this item come to this, I believe, this specific date. And so, I think staff erred on the side of meeting the date while recognizing that the work hasn't reached that point that was desired. So I think as a practical matter, this will be a subsequent conversation really after the first of the year.
And I think the primary gap is between what you have to date identified as problems and issues, any that you've to date have tentative solutions to, but we're not assuming that you would necessarily have those. And that would be what we're looking for, because otherwise we don't know what you know and are intending to address. We just can't read the minds. Okay. And then,
Bert, could I add one thing? It might be helpful because I don't know how many people have actually read the 2012 plan. There's actually a lot of work, a lot of metrics, a lot of already suggestions that are already in there that I'm sure you guys are aware and have been building on with what you brought forward. But if and when you do come back, it might be helpful to review, this is what was identified in 2012, this is the new stuff that's come in, and here's how we're augmenting all of those things. Second, I just wanted to correct one thing that I saw in the report. The report states that the Caltrain, the University Avenue Caltrain station is busiest because of Stanford students, and that's actually not correct. The number one users of that station are really Stanford employees, the hospital employees, the university employees, and that's a large part of it. So when you hear interest in not just part of going through the station area is really because those are some of our biggest users, and identified back since the 1998 comp plan is this hope that the city has of uniting our downtown retail with our Stanford Shopping Center as one unified experience. And the biggest issue is actually, as a bike and a pedestrian, moving through the station. And so to the extent that anything could be brought forward that kind of talks about what was identified in 2012, because there's some excellent stuff in that report. I mean, part of the issue was we just didn't know how to prioritize stuff and fund it. And I recognize you guys are adding to that, and micromobility and e-bikes add a whole new phase. But all of that together, I think, would help both educate the public on what already existed and then help show the new things that you've identified.
I would like to echo that value of making sure that we're really comparing the 2012 plan and what is still valid there, and building off of that and modifying it, changing it as need be, as opposed to starting from scratch. Because there's a lot in there that one of the things, frankly, is to understand what has changed and what are our different needs today versus what they were then, and how do we address those needs?
Yeah, I'll both verify that, and I also just want to note that the staff working on the current bicycle and pedestrian plan, not only are really aware of that and several other plans, not just the 2012 bike and ped plan, but several other plans that have been in the work. They're also paying attention to the stuff that's been said here in the committee about challenges getting to the different stationed access.
Okay, and do we have any members of the public who want to speak?
Yeah, through the chair, we have two speakers. Our first speaker is Elizabeth A.
I did a handout earlier, which is actually applicable to this item, which maybe you guys could share with the people who weren't here for the earlier item. Elizabeth Alexis, Friends of Caltrain card, and just really representing, I would say, myself here today. So first, it would be really helpful to do, I would just call it station audits for all three stations that Palo Alto residents use and Palo Alto employees use, San Antonio, Cal Ave, and downtown. And I think, I have definitely thought about, especially from the Friends of Caltrain perspective, as how you would do that, where you're not just taking the Avenidas, you're taking a bunch of different groups and you're starting from very specific points. You assign different methods of getting to the station and you tell them what train to be on, and then you take the train to Redwood City and have a really nice lunch or breakfast or whatever. But as ways to bring in more people into this process, I think the more people who are engaged in this, who understand the issues, I think the more support you have for whatever needs to get done. I think you're getting these different perspectives, which usually we get the same old people showing up and, like my opinion is only worth, once here at once. It's not 4 times on the same different presentations. And definitely on San Antonio Road, which I think there are very small things that can be done, which would dramatically improve things. But I think especially council members also need to really see the experience coming from different directions. The second point is something that I think for all the different things we're doing, I don't believe that right now we have a good way to measure the level of service or the quality of a bike network right now. Especially when we're looking at some very specific choices between different infrastructure or different places to have crossings, et cetera, et cetera. We really need a way to look at this. We really need to start with I know we already know these key, whether it's the parks or the schools or the shopping districts, but we really need to identify sort of like, origins and destinations that we're really thinking about how people travel between them, not just what it says on a Google map. How long does it really take people? What's the variability of that? What's the perceived distances? What's the real distances? What's the perceived and real comfort, safety? Because we are going to have to make choices about which upgrades we make. And I think we'll need to be able to see current and future. And I just think bringing more quantitative methods to this, it just also a way to structure this, because how do you decide, do this study or that study or these routes or whatever, but to really, really focus in on some of these key origin destinations. Thank you.
And Elizabeth, can you forward a soft copy?
I will forward a soft copy,
Yeah,
this is just sort of a general,
Yep.
It applies to everything.
And thank you. Your comment on San Antonio reminded me of a point that basically we have 3 Caltrain stations that serve Palo Alto, the third being San Antonio. It's on the border, but that's where that corridor is where we're planning on adding thousands of housing units. And so between the fact that the lesser stations at Caltrain now have strong service through long hours of the day and night, and that additional housing that's being built there, looking at that bike network feeding that area over the course of this bike plan is kind of a new consideration that we weren't focused on in the previous bike plan.
Through the chair, our next speaker is Melinda M.
Oh, I'm sorry. And I didn't mean, I thought we were done.
No problem.
Welcome.
Just quick, a couple of things. Alma Street, I regularly see people riding their bikes down Alma. So they're either coming maybe from the Caltrain station and they see that's the route, or they're coming from California Avenue. It's hugely dangerous. I cringe every time. So in terms of signage, there really needs to be signage to direct them to Bryant Street or park or some other way so that they're not on Alma, because it's really dangerous. I'm assuming, because people mentioned Stamford, that Stamford is a major stakeholder in connectivity to downtown, and she mentioned the shopping center. So that's huge. I hope you're looking at that. And then if you're looking at other cities that are successful, for instance, the Netherlands that have bikes, if we really want to have people on bikes, we have to have more critical mass. And then going back to the level crossings, if there were at the start of school and the end of school, crossing guards out there where a bike bridge or bike brigade, whatever you call it, the students are crossing en masse instead of having to go in a path. So I'm assuming, I think I sent that in an email to the committee, but yeah, that would be great. So more that you can do for bikes. I'm a biker myself, and no bike should ever be on the 50-mile-an-hour Alma. Thank you.
Through the chair, that concludes our speakers for this item.
Thank you. Any other comments? I guess a question would be, since we are interested in knowing what you've identified so far, I think colleagues, would we be interested in hearing back a follow-up with that portion of the update? And maybe it'll be a little further along, perhaps at the January meeting?
Yeah, so I think perhaps the date should be, we'll call it loose at this point, and let's target more the product, a product that is in keeping with the interest that you've heard.
Yeah, and I don't, there's no perfect point in time at which we hear that, because you have a certain set of issues that you've identified now, gradually an increased set at any point in time. So it's a check-in point. There's no magical point that's a perfect point in time to do that.
Yeah, I hear that. I think for us, we have a lot of information. We wanted to share it with you. I think it's easy to jump to solutions or recommendations and conclusions. We're going there. That's the next step. And I think for us, as much as we need to remind ourselves that this is a citywide bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan that could have elements that recommend station access. However, I think for us, we have a broader view from this bike and ped plan planning effort, rather than just looking at just station access planning, which is important, but it could be a different subset that really focuses on that effort. I don't want to come at you and have you leave this meeting thinking that this is going to be a plan that recommends all sorts of station access policies. It might have some recommendations, but again, just keeping in mind that this is a citywide bike and ped plan update.
I fully realize that. I've actually been involved with the previous bike plans, and the first thing that I want to again emphasize is there's two steps. One is identifying the problem locations. The other is coming up with proposed solutions. And so the first step of what have you identified, that's what we really want to know. Solutions follow. And you've identified a certain amount at this point in time, even if you haven't gotten to the solution point. Second, this committee is actually all things related with rail. And so that goes to all the ways in which bikes and peds are interacting with this rail line that separates our community or unites our community. And so all the points on the corridor where biking and pedestrians either get to a crossing point, or cross, or hopefully will be able to cross in the future. Those are all the things that this committee would be particularly interested on, inclusive of the stations, but not exclusive of the other matters.
Including as examples that have been discussed here, where the crossing should be, to the extent that there are crossings that don't currently exist. So I think the conversation does highlight the importance, and this is something that we as staff will need to work on trying to be clear on the extent to which this plan will define or perhaps even the level of detail to which the citywide plan will get on these issues of station interface and the intersections. So let's do some work in that area in particular, just so we're clear on expectations.
If I may add, just from our perspective, first of all, gratitude. Thank you so much for all the hard work that went into this. I know it's hard when you really rushed to meet a deadline and put together a report, and then we're like, but what about this? What about this? So thank you, Ozzy and team. When we sit on another committee, like the Stanford ad hoc looking at Quarry Road, and we're talking about, that bike ped plan's coming, it's coming. We're wanting, the bike ped plan people to know that there's a concern over here about Quarry Road and Palo Alto train station, but not wanting to, force that upon you sooner than you're ready. So that's an example of other conversations happening about completely different things that are excited about what you're doing and wanting to just be sure it all gets layered. So at the end of the day, we're not like, oh my gosh, we forgot the Quarry Road part, because you didn't know, right? You didn't know that, right? It's a big city with so many different projects going on, a lot of right hand, left hand, things need to happen. And that's what we're trying to bring, like, okay, but don't forget about this. And yes, rail is really focused on rail to the exclusion that we don't care about anything else other than rail while we're in here. And yet, we know that you've got a lot of other components that you have to think about when you're looking at the comprehensive plan for the city. We're just trying to ensure that things don't fall through the cracks, and then it's too late. And we're looking at a plan 10 years from now that's going to address something that if we were all just a little bit more coordinated in our calendars and our intentions, we could have kind of avoided that. And, I think that's what we all want.
And I'll just add, now that the voters have approved that extension, the city and Stanford and VTA have a staff committee that is actually working on all things, the bus circulation and the improved bike and ped circulation that relates to those changes when you put a new roadway through. So I wasn't assuming that you'd be solving those design problems, but that the bike and ped plan would say, we have in the example of the university station, because I don't want to limit. Here are problems that we have today getting to the station safely and efficiently by bike. And identify those rough locations, not necessarily detailed solutions. That's part of it. Here are problems we have today getting through the station. And this other group is going to be working on those particular solutions. But those would be identified issues and goals within the bike and ped plan to that we would solve the circulation to and through the station. Who does that next? That's the next project.
Chair Burt, I did want to add one thing that came out of the ad hoc meeting earlier this morning. Is that you may have heard that there was a woman that was sexually assaulted at the University Avenue undercrossing. And so to the extent that you guys are thinking about pedestrian and bike safety as you go through there, one of the main things is thinking about the greenery and the shrubs and how you can see a clear path and kind of what that's like. I mean, trees are preferable to bushes, right? Because they create kind of spaces. At our meeting this morning, VTA talked about the fact that that's something that they're aware of at the stations that they're on top of, but I don't know what that means, for example, for California Avenue or even for San Antonio. So when we're thinking about, why don't people use the station as much at night, or what might be areas that we might be looking for, looking at our kind of trees and shrubs and greenery is something that I want to be sure we don't drop.
And through the chair, I just want to remind everyone about the 5 p.m. hard stop. They need to prep for the next meeting.
I'm in the next meeting. Yeah. And so on that example, we wouldn't expect that you'd be coming up with a very specific solutions, but simply I say that pedestrian and bicycle access to those stations is intertwined with them being safe and secure. And then we as a city figure out, and with partner agencies figure out, all right, how would that be addressed? But it would be a recognition that if they aren't safe and secure, people aren't going to ride and walk there. And frankly, that right now is a hindrance to our stations. I know that many people are hesitant in the evening to go there alone, and that's a problem. It's not up to you to solve it, just it's part of the plan. Great. Okay, thank you very much. I'll just note on future meetings, you may have read in the Mercury that we have an update on the El Palo Alto tree, that there's been a study. Everybody see the Mercury article?
In which Pat was quoted, by the way.
Oh, okay. There's a citizen who's done a very detailed study, including relatively new information based on translated Vatican archives that shed real light on the issues. And in any event, it leads to the fact that the tree itself has not been designated as a state historic landmark. The campsite apparently is, if I understand it right. And but now, and it wasn't because some of this information was missing and there were conflicting assumptions on the history. And it's apparently been largely resolved. And so that tree very much relates to our rail issues there. And I think that we might want to discuss an update there at some future meeting and whether the council wants to take an action initiating the historic designation. And on that note, thank you, everybody.
And he was an electrical engineer.